Classical pioneers. The early writers on management and organization include both actual managers and social scientists. The classical school was predominantly concerned with the development of universal principles to achieve successful management, leading to a prosperous business. This was therefore a prescriptive approach, and it's reflected today in the desire for manager to find the formula for success. Think of today's business gurus who claim to have discovered principles such as this. One of the most important classical theorists was Frederick Taylor, 1868 to 1915. His prescription was developed from extensive time and motion study of particular jobs and led to significant changes in the organization of work to achieve efficiency and increase productivity. Some of the most significant principles he developed include the following. The planning of a task should be separate from the doing of the task. This principle further justifies the need of managers and their planning rules. Selection of the workers for particular tasks should be done through rational decision making. This principle stresses the importance of the manager decision making rule. Tasks should be simplified, standardized, and require the minimum of movements. This principle can still be seen as important, but in some industries more than others. There is one best way doing each task, and this should be discovered by manager through rational analysis and measurement. This principle highlights the prescriptive approach and support the rationality of management. The approach outlined here became known as scientific management or Taylorism after its most important exponent. Other significant contributions to this approach were made by Henry Gantt, 1861 to 1919, who was the first to develop the method of the time and motion study, and also Frank Gilbreth, 1868 to 1924, and his wife Lillian, 1878 to 1972. The Gilbreths concentrate on the reduction of movements within tasks, the aim of increasing production by overcoming fatigue. Scientific management in action. This process is suitable in situations where many people can be employed to do simple standardized tasks with which be repeated frequently. For example, if one worker was responsible for each of these tasks, they would not need much training and would be able to repeat the task many times. Managers rather than workers would plan each of these tasks to ensure minimal movement. The use of technology can also play an important part of minimizing the level of skill and number of movements made, and also standardize both the task and the product. Scientific management denominate the classical school, but this was by no means the only approach. Here are two more. Bureaucracy. At around the same time, Max Weber, 1864-1920, was researching and developing a theory of bureaucracy. Weber was a German psychologist, and important links can be made here if you study the course on psychology. His interest was in power and authority and organizational structures. The major influence Weber writing has had on the study of business has mainly centered around understanding the need of stability and consistency in achieving efficiency. This approach required workers to be selected on a merit for clearly defined rules and to work within set rules. Fayol's principle and management. Finally, Henry Fayol, 1841 to 1925, whom we have already come across and made another significant contribution that has influenced the development of this subject. As we had already learned, Fayol was interest in the concept of administration worker as a manager, industrialist, and theorist in France. He developed a set of general principles for managing organization. These were seen as a prescription that could be passed to other manager, being universally applicable and so indicative of the classical school's aims. Activity 1.5 Reading. Look now at the Mullins 2010 page 260-64 to see a diagram explanation and evaluation of Maslow theory. Systems and contingency approaches. The human relation approach remains popular, but there have been other recent developments. The system theory approach falls to be there some of the core components of both the classical and human relations theory. Because organizations are open to the outside world, these open systems have to be complex. They include the interaction of people, technology, and tasks further as open system organization are seen to interact with the external environment. There are major implications for the study and business and for the role of managers, as decisions they make depend on a complex number of variables. This idea has linked with another related approach, that of contingency theory. This theory goes against the classical school's search for one best way or for universal principles. Contingency theories stress the managers need to adapt their style to match the changing condition. They claim the specific variables of each situation need to be considered and decision made in light of this analysis. This in turn is related to the decision-making approach, a specialist area of contingency theory. Proponents of this theory focus on the needs for goods communication and information flows, the processing of this information and how it is used by the managers as decision makers is seen to be a key element of organizational effectiveness and the achievements of business objectives against the business organization is defined as a system, and as in all three approaches it is seen as vital to recognize the complexity of the organization. For decision making theories, this complexity results in uncertainty. However, unlike Weber's bureaucratic approach for predictability and stability, decision making theory accept that complexity means uncertainty and so is more focused on managing this uncertainty. Activity 1.6. Imagine that you are a sales manager and you have to make decision. You have to decide whether or not to recruit an additional member to your existing sales team. Do not spend more than 15 minutes on this. Number 1, what information would you need in order to make this decision? Number 2, what situational factors would you need to take into account? Number 3, think of 3 possible decisions you could make and write a few lines on the different circumstances under which you may have made each decision. Continue evolution. Many of the current developments in business and management are influenced by the evolutionary stage discussed above. The story certainly does not stop here. In fact, the story continues at an ever faster pace. Among the most significant contributors who had influenced contemporary business and management practice are Peters and Waterman in the 1980s, who studied the excellent businesses to identify common characteristics of success. For details, see Mullins 2010, page 777 to 78. Their results have been criticized. Unfortunately, also most of the excellent companies they identified did not survive the 1980s for one reason or another. Other influential contributors to managed theory and science worth looking out for when you are browsing in the library include Philip Kotler, Henry Mintzberg, Rosabeth Kanter, and Michael Porter, and Frieder Drucker. We will consider some of these writings and further developments in the next section, particularly in Chapter 4. Have a quick look through the index to Mullins' book and see how many you can find. The subject of business and management continues to evolve, react to wider changes and new needs. The final chapter in the guide looks at current trends and emerging issues, so we return to this review of ideas and theories about management and business later on. Developing an understanding of the subject origins, as discussed here in Chapter 2 of Mullins, can really help you to investigate the new themes we discuss later in the subject guide. It is important when reading about any new management tool, organizational theory, or business practice to consider how it developed and what influence it developed Doing so will not only help your understanding of the new development but will also assist you in your attempts to evaluate its work. 51.7 Reading. Now read the following parts of your main K-Text, Mullins, 2010, Chapter 2, Approaches to Organization and Management. Body, 2008, Chapter 2 also reviews the different approaches to management. Chapter Review. Key points. Concept are contested and usage can change over time, so no single or correct definition can exist. Many concepts and ideas are relevant to the study of this course, but the central ones can be identified as management, business, organization, and organizational behavior. The origin of business and management have a long story tied to the progress of human society. The creation of a body of theoretical and experimental knowledge has occurred since 19. The evolution of ideas in about business and management has included a number of important stages. Include classical approaches, perspectives that focus on the human element, and a range of theories, which stress the complexity of the subject. A reminder of your learning outcomes. Having completed this chapter and the essential reading and activities, you should be able to define and evaluate the concept management, business, organization, and organizational behavior, and appreciate the variety of possible meanings. Develop an understanding of the subject origin, including the case stage of evolution and the work of the main contributors. Identify and evaluate the influence of the subject historical context on contemporary developments. Sample examination question. When considering this, remember the guidance given in the introduction about exam preparation. Question can be answered fully in approximately 45 minutes under examination condition. Number 1. Compare and contrast the approaches associated with the scientific managed perspective and the human relation school. Which do you consider to be most relevant to business management today? Number 2. One of the approaches to manage theory found under the classical heading is bureaucracy. Identify, describe, and evaluate the main of features of bureaucracy and the bureaucratic organization. B. Discuss why public sector organization might need to follow bureaucratic principles. 3. Discuss the view that the study of the evolution of management theories has no practical value to manager. Reinforce your arguments with reference to appropriate theory and practice. Number 4. Evaluate the contribution made by 3 key contributors to the development of business and management as a distinct area of study. Advise and answering questions. To help you further with your sample preparation, we offer below some suggestions for one of the answer. However, it is very important to remember that there is no model of correct answer to any of the question. It is more important to demonstrate what you have learned by developing your own response to the question, supported by evidence from the relevant part of this chapter. Number 4. Evaluate the contribution made by 3 key contributors to the development of business and management as a distinct area of study. Example of the contributors you could consider would include Frederick Taylor, Henry Gantt, the Gilbreths, Max Weber, Henry Fayol, Elton Mayo, Abraham Maslow, Peters, and Waterman, and others you have read about. On introducing your choice of contributors, you could explain why you decided on this rather than others. It would be relevant to show that you understand the main points of the work of each, including the way that each one of 3 contributors has used contents by approaching this in a critical way. Showing the merits and problem. It would be relevant to focus on understanding this contribution within their historical context, making comparison of the school and traditions from which they develop. It would also be used to consider how their contribution influence future developments in business and management and the relevance of their work today. Therefore, by the end of your answer, the reader would be clear why you have chosen these contributors, their significance that you understand, and can make corporative evaluation of their work, and that you can locate this in the wider historical context of the subject.